It is, I have a spinning that requires a flatness tolerance of 20 thousandths on two surfaces. My QC technicians believe I need a parallelism tolerance also. What are your thoughts? I'm not sure how to combine the two together. Let's take a look at the drawing here and see what we're talking about. So here's the drawing that was in question, and we can see that we have a flat disc that's got a little bit of a bump in the middle of it. And we control the flatness of this left side and the flatness of the right side with these two callouts we see here. Each of those surfaces being controlled to be at least 20 thou flat. Now the question is, should I include parallelism tolerances also for these features? Well, we also see that we've identified datum feature A as this surface right here. Now, datum feature A is a separate surface than the two surfaces we are controlling with flatness. However, since this is a sheet metal feature, we could probably assume that as long as this left side of the surface is flat, the right side, or datum feature A, is also going to be pretty flat. So with that in mind, we also see that nowhere on this drawing are we referencing datum feature A. Flatness has nothing to do with datums. It's only flat to the feature itself. So what does that all really mean? Well, when we consider flatness versus parallelism, they're definitely not the same thing. They're two separate symbols in the ASME and the ISO standards. Flatness is making sure that the feature is flat to itself, whereas parallelism is making sure that it's parallel to another feature. Maybe not so obviously, but that feature should be a datum feature. Now, a good example is this table that we see here. This table, although poorly made, is very flat. We could guarantee the surface of the table has a very flat surface. However, if we're curious about how level or parallel that surface is to something else, we would need to use parallelism. We can see here that this table is not very parallel to the bottom surface or the ground, but we could tolerance it and ensure a certain level of parallelism. Now, oftentimes you see these two together or just the parallelism controlling the flatness, because as we can see here, we can also guarantee a certain level of flatness by just using parallelism. But again, parallelism will require us to utilize a datum. So if we have a surface that's parallel to, let's say, 20 thousandths, it's also going to be checked to flatness of 20 thousandths. If we would like to refine that flatness and say we can have a certain parallelism to 20 thousandths, but maybe a flatness of only 5 thou, we could shrink that and reduce the form error, but keep that orientation error much looser. So let's take this back to the original example and see how it relates. So the surfaces in question are this left surface and this right surface here. And this flatness callout right here is ensuring this surface stays flat. And this callout here is ensuring this larger surface also stays flat. But what does flatness mean? Well, now that we know a little bit more about flatness versus parallelism, we can see that this surface, even if it existed here, could be checked to be very flat. All we need to do is make sure that it sits inside a zone of 20 thousandths in width. So what about this surface here? Is this surface here very flat? And the answer is it could be. We could make sure that that surface is flat to at least 20 thousandths. Because remember, as far as the tolerance zone for this 20 thousandths, we don't care about the orientation or where the surface is at. We just want to make sure that surface is flat, much like this table over here. Now, we could also have a surface that looks like this. But we would not be able to fit that entire surface inside a zone of 20 thousandths or less, and therefore it would fail for flatness. But we're not controlling where or what sort of orientation this surface is in. And the same is true for this one over here. We could see this large surface could be here and checked to be flat and made sure that it fits inside a zone of 20 thousandths. And if it does fit in that zone, it passes for flatness. But that surface could also exist much like this and still pass for the same flatness specification because the tolerance zone doesn't care about where or what sort of orientation the surface is in. It's just making sure the surface is flat. Now, if we did care about that, we could actually utilize parallelism in this scenario and change both of these to be parallelism of 20 thousandths with respect to A. And if we did that for both surfaces, we would now be controlling and checking the orientation of both of these surfaces. So our tolerance zone is still not controlling the location, but we will be controlling the orientation. So the tolerance zone is going to look like this, and this tolerance zone must stay parallel to datum feature A, which is this surface right here. And so our zone could be here, or it could be here, or it could even be way out here. We're still not controlling the location. But what we are doing is making sure that if the surface starts to deviate too much in orientation, as soon as it leaves that tolerance zone, we've failed for orientation. But we can see we're also controlling the form of the surface. So it might have good orientation, but it can have up to 20 thousandths of form error, which is flatness for a flat planar surface. So we are not only controlling the orientation, but as well as the form of this surface. And we could also, beyond that, consider refining the form to something much tighter. So we control the orientation to maybe 30 thousandths or 20 thousandths as we see here, but let's say we want to make sure that we have less than 20 thousandths of form error or flatness. We would add a second tolerance zone, much like we see here on the table, where the surface in question would have to fit inside both tolerance zones. It's kind of like a Venn diagram. We're refining the orientation and form that was there with just a form control. So in this scenario, it depends as a designer which is more critical to you. Do you only care about the form and want to control the orientation and location with other tolerances, or would you like to control the orientation and form together with parallelism? Or lastly, would you control the orientation with parallelism and then refine the form with something much tighter? So hopefully this helps answer your question, and thanks for submitting.
Our goal is to be your best source for GD&T information online. It's important to us that everyone involved in engineering and manufacturing have the chance to learn and better understand GD&T on your prints. We have many free resources to help you get started on your learning journey. Subscribe to our GD&T community using the link in the description below or visit our website. Test your knowledge with our GD&T and print reading quizzes. Download helpful charts and access articles